Chapter 6. Violet-Scented Breath. Blofeld completed his inspection of the faces. As he had anticipated, only one pair of eyes had slid away from his. He had known he was right. The double-checked reports had been entirely circumstantial, but his own eyes and his intuition had to be the seal. He slowly put both hands under the table. One hand remained flat on his thigh. The other went to a side pocket and drew out a thin gold vinaigrette and placed it on the table in front of him. He prized open the lid with his thumbnail, took out a violet-scented cachou and slipped it into his mouth. It was his custom, when unpleasant things had to be said, to sweeten his breath. Blofeld tucked the cachou under his tongue and began to talk in a soft, resonant, and very beautifully modulated voice. "I have a report to make to members about the big affair, about Plan Omega." Blofeld never prefixed his words with gentlemen, friends, colleagues, or the like. These were fripperies. "But before I proceed to that matter, for security's sake, I propose to touch upon another topic." Blofeld looked mildly round the table. The same pair of eyes evaded his. He continued in a narrative tone of voice, "The executive will agree that the first 3 years of our experience have been successful. Thanks in part to our German section, the recovery of Himmler's jewels from the Mondsee was successfully accomplished in total secrecy and the stones disposed of by our Turkish section in Beirut. Income £750,000. The disappearance of the safe with its contents intact from the MVD headquarters in East Berlin has never been traced to our Russian section, and the subsequent sale to the American Central Intelligence Agency yielded $500,000. The interception of 1,000 ounces of heroin in Naples, the property of the Pastori circuit, when sold to the Fiapone interests in Los Angeles, brought in $800,000. The British Secret Service paid £100,000 for the Czech germ warfare files from the state chemical factory in Pilsen. The successful blackmail of former SS Gruppenführer Sontag, living under the name of Santos in Havana, yielded a meager $100,000, unfortunately all the man possessed. And the assassination of Perrin, the French heavy water specialist who went over to the Communists through Berlin, added, thanks to the importance of his knowledge and the fact that we got him before he had talked, 1 billion francs from the 2e Bureau. In round sums, as the special executive knows from our accounts, the total income to date, not counting our last and undistributed dividend, has amounted to approximately £1.5 million sterling in the Swiss francs and the Venezuelan bolivars, in which, for reasons of prudence, they continue to be the hardest currencies in the world, we convert all our takings. This income, as the special executive will be aware, has been distributed in accordance with our charter as to 10% for overheads and working capital, 10% to myself, and the remainder in equal shares of 4% to the members, a profit to each member of approximately £60,000. This amount I regard as a barely adequate remuneration for member services. £20,000 a year is not in accordance with our expectations, but you will be aware that Plan Omega will yield sufficient to provide each of us with a considerable fortune and will allow us, if we wish to do so, to wind up our organization and transfer our respective energies to other pursuits. Blofeld looked down the table. He said amiably, "Any questions?" The 20 pairs of eyes, on this occasion all of them, gazed stolidly, unemotionally, back at their chairman. Each man had made his own calculation, knew his own mind. There was no comment to be extracted from these good, though narrow minds. They were satisfied, but it was not a part of their harsh personalities to say so. These were known things that their chairman had spoken. It was time for the unknown. Blofeld slipped a second cachou into his mouth, manoeuvred it under his tongue, and continued. Then so be it. And now to the last operation, completed a month ago and yielding $1 million. Blofeld's eyes moved down the left-hand rank of members to the end of the row. He said, softly, Stand up, number 7. Marius de Mangay of the Union Course, a proud, chunky man with slow eyes, who was wearing ready-made, rather sharp clothes that probably came from the Galeries Barbe in Marseille, got slowly to his feet. He looked squarely down the table at Blofeld. His big, rough hands hung relaxed at the seam of his trousers. Blofeld appeared to answer his gaze, but in fact he was noting the reaction of the Corsican next to number 7, number 12, Pierre Bourreau. This man sat silently facing Blofeld at the far end of the long table. It was his eyes that had been evasive during the meeting. Now they were not. Now they were relaxed, assured. Whatever the eyes had feared had passed. Blofeld addressed the company. This operation, you will recall, involved the kidnapping of the 17-year-old daughter of Magnus Blomberg, owner of the Principality Hotel in Las Vegas and participant in other American enterprises through his membership of the Detroit Purple Gang. The girl was abducted from her father's suite in the Hotel de Paris in Monte Carlo and taken by sea to Corsica. This part of the operation was executed by the Corsican section. $1 million ransom was demanded. Mr. Blomberg was willing, and, in accordance with the instructions of Spectre, the money in an inflated life raft was dropped at dusk off the Italian coast near San Remo. At nightfall, the raft was recovered by the ship operated by our Sicilian section. This section is to be commended for detecting the transistorized radio transmitter concealed in the raft, which it was intended should allow a unit of the French Navy to direction find our ship and hunt it down. On receipt of the ransom money, and in accordance with our undertaking, the girl was returned to her parents, apparently suffering from no ill effects, except for the hair dye that had been necessary to transfer her from Corsica to a wagon-lee in the blue train from Marseille. I say apparently. From a source in the police commissariat at Nice, I now learn that the girl was violated during her captivity in Corsica. Blofeld paused to allow this intelligence time to sink in. He continued, It is the parents who maintain that she was violated. It is possible that only carnal knowledge with her consent was involved. No matter. This organization undertook that the girl would be returned undamaged. Without splitting hairs about the effect of sexual knowledge on a girl, I am of the opinion that, whether the act was voluntary or involuntary on the girl's part, she was returned to her parents in a damaged, or at least used, condition. Blofeld rarely employed gestures. Now he slowly opened the left hand that lay on the table. He said, in the same even tone of voice, We are a large and very powerful organization. I am not concerned with morals or ethics, but members will be aware that I desire and most strongly recommend that Spectre shall conduct itself in a superior fashion. There is no discipline in Spectre except self-discipline. We are a dedicated fraternity whose strength lies entirely in the strength of each member. Weakness in one member is the death watch beetle in the total structure. You are aware of my views in this matter. and on the occasions when cleansing has been necessary, you have approved my action. In this case, I have already done what I considered necessary vis-à-vis this girl's family. I have returned $500,000 with an appropriate note of apology. This, despite the matter of the radio transmitter, which was a breach of our contract with the family. I dare say they knew nothing of the ruse. It was typical police behavior, a pattern that I was expecting. The dividend for all of us from this operation will be correspondingly reduced. Regarding the culprit, I have satisfied myself that he is guilty. I have decided on the appropriate action. Blofeld looked down the table. His eyes were fixed on the man standing, on number 7. The Corsican, Marius de Mangay, looked back at him steadily. He knew he was innocent. He knew who was guilty. His body was still with tension, but it was not fear. He had faith, as they all had, in the rightness of Blofeld. He could not understand why he had been singled out as a target for all the eyes that were now upon him. But Blofeld had decided, and Blofeld was always right. Blofeld noted the man's courage and sensed the reasons for it. He also observed the sweat shining on the face of number 12, the man alone at the head of the table. Good. The sweat would improve the contact. Under the table, Blofeld's right hand came up off his thigh, found the knob, and pulled the switch. The body of Pierre Bureau, seized in the iron fist of 3,000 volts, arced in the armchair as if it had been kicked in the back. The rough mat of black hair rose sharply straight up on his head and remained upright, above the contorted, bursting face. The eyes glared wildly and then faded. A blackened tongue slowly protruded between the snarling teeth and remained hideously extended. Thin wisps of smoke rose from under the hands, from the middle of the back, and from under the thighs where the concealed electrodes in the chair had made contact. Blofeld pulled back the switch. The lights in the room that had dimmed to orange, making a dull supernatural glow, brightened to normal. The roasted meat and burnt fabric smell spread slowly. The body of number 12 crumpled horribly. There was a sharp crack as the chin hit the edge of the table. It was all over. Blofeld's soft, even voice broke the silence. He looked down the table at number 7. He noted that the staunch, impassive stance had not quavered. This was a good man with good nerves. Blofeld said, "Sit down, number 7. I am satisfied with your conduct." Satisfaction was Blofeld's highest expression of praise. It was necessary to distract the attention of number 12. He knew that he was under suspicion. There might have been an untidy scene. Some of the men round the table nodded their understanding. As usual, Blofeld's reasoning made good sense. No one was greatly perturbed or surprised by what they had witnessed. Blofeld always exercised his authority, meted out justice, in full view of the members. There had been 2 previous occasions of this nature, both at similar meetings, and both on security or disciplinary grounds, which affected the cohesion, the inner strength, of the whole team. In one, the offender had been shot by Blofeld through the heart with a thick needle fired from a compressed air pistol, no mean feat at around 12 paces. In the other, the guilty man, who had been seated next to Blofeld on his left hand, had been garroted with a wire noose casually flicked over his head, and then, with 2 swift steps by Blofeld, pulled tight over the back of the man's chair. Those 2 deaths had been just, necessary. So had this death, the 3rd. Now, the members, ignoring the heap of death at the end of the table, settled in their chairs. It was time to get back to business. Blofeld snapped shut the gold vinaigrette and slipped it into a waistcoat pocket. "The Corsican section," he said softly, "will put forward recommendations for a replacement for number 12. But that can wait until after completion of Plan Omega. On this matter there are certain details to be discussed. Sub-Operator G, recruited by the German section, has made an error, a serious error, which radically affects our timetable. This man, whose membership of the Red Lightning Tongue in Macau should have made him expert in conspiracy, was instructed to make his headquarters at a certain clinic in the south of England, an admirable refuge for his purposes. His instructions were to keep intermittent contact with the airman Pataki at the not-far-distant Boscombe Down airfield, where the bomber squadron is under training. He was to report at intervals on the airman's fitness and morale. His reports have been satisfactory. And the airman, by the way, continues to be willing. But Sub-Operator G was also required to post the letter on D+1, or 3 days from now. Unfortunately, this foolish man took it upon himself to become embroiled in a hot-headed fashion with some fellow patient at the clinic, as a result of which, and I need not go into details, he is now in Brighton Central Hospital, suffering from second-degree burns. He is thus out of action for at least a week. This will involve an irritating but fortunately not a serious delay in Plan Omega. Fresh instructions have been issued. The airman Pataki has been provided with a file of influenza virus of sufficient strength for him to remain on the sick list for 1 week, during which he will be unable to accept his test flight. He will take the first flight after his recovery and alert us accordingly. The date of his flight will be communicated to Sub-Operator G, and he will by that time be recovered and will post the letter according to plan. The Special Executive, Blofeld glanced round the table, will readjust their flight schedule to Area Zeta in accordance with the new operational schedule. As for Sub-Operator G, Blofeld bent his gaze one by one on the 3 ex-Gestapo men. This is an unreliable agent. The German section will make arrangements for his elimination within 24 hours of the posting of the letter. Is that understood? The 3 German faces stood unanimously to attention. Yes, sir! For the rest, continued Blofeld, all is in order. Number 1 has solidly established his cover in Area Zeta. The treasure-hunting myth continues to be built up and has already gained full credence. The crew of the yacht, all hand-picked sub-operators, are accepting the discipline and the security regulations better than had been expected. A suitable land base has been secured. It is remote and not easily accessible. It belongs to an eccentric Englishman, the nature of whose friends and personal habits demands seclusion. Your arrival in Area Zeta continues to be minutely planned. Your wardrobe awaits you in Areas F and D according to your various flight plans. This wardrobe, down to the smallest detail, will be in accordance with your identities as financial backers of the treasure hunt who have demanded to visit the scene and take part in the adventure. You are not gullible millionaires. You are the kind of rich, middle-class rentier and businessman who might be expected to be taken in by such a scheme. You are all shrewd, so you have come to watch over your investment and ensure that not one doubloon goes astray. Nobody smiled. You are all aware of the part you have to play, and I trust that you have studied your respective roles with close attention. There was a careful nodding of heads round the table. These men were all satisfied that not too much had been asked of them in the matter of their cover. This one was a rich cafe proprietor from Marseille. He had been one. He could talk to anyone about the business. That one had vineyards in Yugoslavia. He had been brought up in Bled. He could talk vintages and crop sprays with a Calvé from Bordeaux. That one had smuggled cigarettes from Tangier. He had done so and would be sufficiently discreet about it. All of them had been given covers that would stand up at least a second-degree inspection. In the matter of aqualung training, continued Blofeld, I would like reports from each section. Blofeld looked at the Yugoslav section on his left. Satisfactory! Satisfactory! Echoed the German section, and the word was repeated round the table. Blofeld commented, "The safety factor is paramount in all underwater operations. Has this factor received sufficient attention in your respective training schedules?" Affirmative. "And exercises with the new CO2 underwater gun?" Again, all sections reported favorably. "And now," continued Blofeld, "I would like a report from the Sicilian section on the preparations for the bullion drop." Fidelio Shakar was a gaunt, cadaverous Sicilian with a closed face. He might have been, and had been, a schoolmaster with communist leanings. He spoke for the section because his English, the compulsory language of the special executive, was the best. He said, in a careful, expository tone of voice, "The chosen area has been carefully reconnoitred. It is satisfactory. I have here," he touched the briefcase on his lap, "the plans and detailed timetable for the information of the chairman and members. Briefly, the designated area, Area T, is on the northwest slopes of Mount Etna, above the tree line. That is to say, between the altitudes of 2,000 and 3,000 meters. This is an uninhabited and uncultivated area of black lava on the upper slopes of the volcano, more or less above the small town of Bronte. For the purpose of the drop, an area approximately 2 kilometers square will be marked out by the torches of the recovery team. In the center of this area will be positioned a Decker aircraft homing signal as an additional navigational aid. The bullion flight, which I estimate conservatively will consist of 5 Mach 4 transport comets, should make their run-in at 10,000 feet at an airspeed of 300 miles per hour. Having regard to the weight of each consignment, multiple parachutes will be needed and, owing to the harsh nature of the terrain, very careful packing in foam rubber will be essential. The parachutes and the packings should be coated in day-glow or some phosphorescent paint to assist recovery. No doubt, the man opened his hands. The Spectre memorandum of dropping instructions will include these and other details, but very careful planning and coordination by those responsible for the flight will be necessary. And the recovery team? Blofeld's voice probed softly, but with an urgent edge to it. The capo mafiosi of the district is my uncle. He has 8 grandchildren to whom he is devoted. I have made it clear that the whereabouts of these children is known to my associates. The man understood. At the same time, as instructed, I made him the offer of £1 million for total recovery and safe delivery to the depot at Catania. This is a most important sum for the funds of the Unione. The capo mafiosi agreed to these terms. He understands that the robbery of a bank is in question. He wishes to know no more. The delay that has been announced will not affect the arrangements. It will still be within the full moon period. Sub-Operator 52 is a most capable man. He has been provided with the helicopter set issued to me for the purpose, and he will listen on 18 megacycles in accordance with the schedule. Meanwhile, he remains in touch with the capo mafiosi to whom he is related by marriage. Blofeld was silent for a long 2 minutes. He slowly nodded. I am satisfied. So far as the next step is concerned, the disposal of the bullion, this will be in the hands of Sub-Operator 201, of whom we have had full experience. He is a man to be trusted. The MV Mercurial will load at Catania and proceed through the Suez Canal to Goa, in Portuguese India. En route, at the designated cross-bearing in the Arabian Gulf, she will rendezvous with a merchant ship owned by a consortium of the chief Bombay bullion brokers. The bullion will be transferred to the ship in exchange for the equivalent value at the ruling gold bullion price in used Swiss francs, dollars, and bolivars. These large amounts of currency will be broken up into the allotted percentages and will then be transferred from Goa by chartered plane to 22 different Swiss banks in Zurich, where they will be placed in deposit boxes. The keys to these numbered boxes will be distributed to members after this meeting. From that moment on, and subject, of course, to the usual security regulations regarding injudicious spending and display, these deposits will be entirely at the disposal of members. Blofeld's slow, calm eyes surveyed the meeting. Is this procedure considered satisfactory? There were cautious nods. Number 18, Kandinsky, the Polish electronics expert, spoke up. He spoke without diffidence. There was no diffidence between these men. "This is not my province," he said seriously. "But is there not danger that one of the navies concerned will intercept the ship, the Mercurial, and remove the bullion? It will be clear to the Western powers that the bullion will have to be removed from Sicily. Various patrols of the air and sea would be an easy matter." "You forget," Blofeld's voice was patient, "that neither the first, nor if need be the second, bomb will be rendered safe until the money is in the Swiss banks. There will be no risk on that score. Nor another possibility that I had envisaged is there likely to be danger of our ship being pirated on the high seas by some independent operator. I envisage that complete secrecy will be enforced by the Western powers. Any leakage would result in panic. Any other questions?" Bruno Bayer, one of the German section, said stiffly, "It is fully understood that number 1 will be in immediate control in Area Zeta. Is it correct that he will have full powers delegated by yourself? Is it that he will, so to speak, be supreme commander in the field?" How typical, thought Blofeld. The Germans will always obey orders, but they wish to be quite clear where final authority resides. The German generals would only obey the supreme command if they knew Hitler approved the supreme command. He said firmly, "I have made it clear to the special executive, and I repeat. Number 1 is already, by your unanimous vote, my successor in case of my death or incapacity. So far as Plan Omega is concerned, he is Deputy Supreme Commander of Spectre, and since I shall remain at headquarters to keep watch over reactions to the letter, Number 1 will be Supreme Commander in the field. His orders will be obeyed as if they were my own. I hope we are fully agreed in this matter." Blofeld's eyes, sharply focused, swept the meeting. Everyone signified his agreement. "So," said Blofeld, "then the meeting is now closed. I will instruct the disposal squad to take care of the remains of number 12. Number 18, please connect me with number 1 on 20 megacycles. That wave band will have been unoccupied by the French post office since 8 o'clock. Chapter 7. Fasten your lap strap. James Bond scraped the last dregs of yogurt out of the bottom of the carton that said, "Goat milk culture, from our own goat farm at Stanway, Gloss, the heart of the Cotswolds, according to an authentic Bulgarian recipe." He took an Energen roll, sliced it carefully, they are apt to crumble, and reached for the black treacle. He masticated each mouthful thoroughly. Saliva contains tyolin. Thorough mastication creates tyolin, which helps to convert starches into sugar to supply energy for the body. Tyolin is an enzyme. Other enzymes are pepsin, found in the stomach, and trypsin and erepsin, found in the intestine. These and other enzymes are chemical substances that break up the food as it passes through the mouth, the stomach, and the digestive tract, and help absorb it directly into the bloodstream. James Bond now had all these important facts at his fingertips. He couldn't understand why no one had told him these things before. Since leaving Shrublands 10 days before, He had never felt so well in his life. His energy had doubled. Even the paperwork he had always found an intolerable drudgery was now almost a pleasure. He ate it up. Sections, after a period of being only surprised, were now becoming slightly irritated by the forceful, clear-headed minutes that came shooting back at them from the 00 section. Bond awoke so early and so full of beans that he had taken to arriving at his office early and leaving late, much to the irritation of his secretary, the delectable Lelia Ponsonby, who found her own private routines being put seriously out of joint. She was also beginning to show signs of irritation and strain. She had even taken upon herself to have a private word with Miss Moneypenny, M's secretary, and her best friend in the building. Miss Moneypenny, swallowing her jealousy of Lelia Ponsonby, had been encouraging. "It's all right, Lil," she had said over coffee in the canteen. "The old man was like that for a couple of weeks after he had got back from that damned nature cure place. It was like working for Gandhi or Schweitzer or someone. Then a couple of bad cases came up and rattled him, and one evening he went to Blades, to take his mind off things, I suppose. And the next day he felt awful, and looked it. And from then on he's been all right again. I suppose he got back on the champagne cure or something. It's really the best for men. It makes them awful, but at least they're human like that. It's when they get godlike one can't stand them." May, Bond's elderly Scottish treasure, came in to clear the breakfast things away. Bond had lit up a Duke of Durham king-size with filter. The Authoritative Consumers Union of America rates this cigarette with the smallest tar and nicotine content. Bond had transferred to the brand from the fragrant but powerful Morland Balkan mixture with 3 gold rings round the paper he had been smoking since his teens. The Dukes tasted of almost nothing, but they were at least better than Vanguard's, the new tobaccoless cigarette from America, that, despite its health-protecting qualities, filled the room with a faint burning leaf smell that made visitors to his office inquire whether something was on fire somewhere. May was fiddling about with the breakfast things, her signal that she had something to say. Bond looked up from the centre news page of the Times. "Anything on your mind, May?" May's elderly, severe features were flushed. She said defensively, "I have that." She looked straight at Bond. She was holding the yoghurt carton in her hand. She crumpled it in her strong fingers and dropped it among the breakfast things on the tray. "It's not my place to say it, Mr. James, but you're poisoning yourself," Bond said cheerfully. "I know, May, you're quite right, but at least I've got them down to 10 a day. I'm not talking about your wee bitty smoke. I'm talking about this." May gestured at the tray. "This pap." The word was spat out with disdain. Having got this off her chest, May gathered steam. "It's no recht for a man to be eating bairns' food and slops and such like. You needn't worry that I'll talk, Mr. James, but I'm knowing more about your life than maybe you were wishing I did. There's been times when they brought you home from hospital, and there's talk you've been in a motoring accident or some such. But I'm not the old fool you think I am, Mr. James. Motoring accidents don't make one small hole in your shoulder or your leg or somewhere. Why, you've got scars on you then now. Ach, you needn't grin like that, I've seen 'em. That could only be made by bullets. And these guns and knives and things you carry around when you're off abroad. Ach." May put her hands on her hips. Her eyes were bright and defiant. "You can tell me to mind my own business and pack me off back to Glenorchy. But before I go, I'm telling you, Mr. James, that if you get yourself into another fight and you've got nothing but yon muck in your stomach, they'll be bringing you home in a hearse. That's what they'll be doing." In the old days, James would have told May to go to hell and leave him in peace. Now, with infinite patience and good humour, he gave May a quick run-through of the basic tenets of live as against dead foods. "You see, May," he said reasonably, "all these denaturize foods, white flour, white sugar, white rice, white salts, whites of eggs, these are dead foods. Either they're dead anyway, like whites of egg, or they've had all the nourishment refined out of them. They're slow poisons, like fried foods and cakes and coffee and heaven knows how many of the things I used to eat. And anyway, look how wonderfully well I am. I feel absolutely a new man since I took to eating the right things and gave up drink and so on. I sleep twice as well, I've got twice as much energy. No headaches, no muscle pains, no hangovers. Why, a month ago there wasn't a week went by but that on at least one day I couldn't eat anything for breakfast but a couple of aspirins and a prairie oyster. And you know quite well that that used to make you cluck and tut-tut all over the place like an old hen. Well, Bond raised his eyebrows amiably. What about that? May was defeated. She picked up the tray and with a stiff back made for the door. She paused on the threshold and turned round. Her eyes were bright with angry tears. "Well, all I can say is, Mr. James, that maybe you're right and maybe you're wrong. What worries the life out of me is that you're not yourself anymore." She went out and banged the door. Bond sighed and picked up the paper. He said the magical words that all men say when a middle-aged woman makes a temperamental scene. Change of life? And went back to reading about the latest reasons for not having a summit meeting. The telephone, the red one that was the direct line with headquarters, gave its loud, distinctive jangle. Bond kept his eyes on the page and reached out a hand. With the Cold War easing off, it was not like the old days. This would be nothing exciting. Probably cancelling his shoot at Bisley that afternoon with the new FN rifle. Bond speaking. It was the Chief of Staff. Bond dropped his paper on the floor. He pressed the receiver to his ear, trying, as in the old days, to read behind the words. "At once, please, James. M. Something for me? Something for everyone. Crash dive and ultra hush. If you've got any dates for the next few weeks, better cancel them. You'll be off tonight. See you." The line went dead. Bond had the most selfish car in England. It was a Mark II Continental Bentley that some rich idiot had married to a telegraph pole on the Great West Road. Bond had bought the bits for £1,500, and Rolls had straightened the bend in the chassis and fitted new clockwork, the Mark IV engine with 9.5 compression. Then Bond had gone to Mulliner's with £3,000, which was half his total capital, and they had sawn off the old cramped sports saloon body and had fitted a trim, rather square convertible two-seater affair, power-operated with only 2 large armed bucket seats in black leather. The rest of the blunt end was all knife-edged, rather ugly boot. The car was painted in rough, not gloss, battleship grey, and the upholstery was black Morocco. She went like a bird and a bomb, and Bond loved her more than all the women at present in his life, rolled, if that were feasible, together. But Bond refused to be owned by any car. A car, however splendid, was a means of locomotion. He called the Continental the locomotive. "I'll pick you up in my locomotive." And it must at all times be ready to locomote. No garage doors to break one's nails on, no pampering with mechanics except for the quick monthly service. The locomotive slept out of doors in front of his flat and was required to start immediately in all weathers and, after that, stay on the road. The twin exhausts, Bond had demanded 2-inch pipes. He hadn't liked the old soft flutter of the Mark, growled solidly as the long grey nose, topped by a big octagonal silver bolt instead of the winged bee, swerved out of the little Chelsea Square and into King's Road. It was 9 o'clock, too early for the bad traffic, and Bond pushed the car fast up Sloane Street and into the park. It would also be too early for the traffic police, so he did some fancy driving that brought him to the Marble Arch exit in 3 minutes flat. Then there came the slow round the houses into Baker Street, and so into Regent's Park. Within 10 minutes of getting the hurry call, he was going up in the lift of the big square building to the 8th and top floor. Already, as he strode down the carpeted corridor, he smelt emergency. On this floor, besides M's offices, was housed communications, and from behind the grey closed doors there came a steady zing and crackle from the banks of transmitters and a continuous machine-gun rattle and clack from the cipher machines. It crossed Bond's mind that a general call was going out. What the hell had happened? The Chief of Staff was standing over Miss Moneypenny. He was handing her signals from a large sheaf and giving her routing instructions. CIA Washington, personal for Dulles, cipher XXX by teleprinter, Matisse to ZM Bureau, same prefix and route. Station F for Head of NATO Intelligence, personal, standard route through Head of Section. This one by safe hand to Head of MI5, personal, copy to Commissioner of Police, personal, and these. He handed over a thick batch. Personal to heads of stations from M, cipher XX by Whitehall Radio and Porty's Head, all right? Clear them as quick as you can, there's a good girl. There'll be more coming. We're in for a bad day. Miss Moneypenny smiled cheerfully. She liked what she called the shot and shell days. It reminded her of when she had started in the service as a junior in the cipher department. She leant over and pressed the switch on the intercom. 007's here, sir. She looked up at Bond. You're off. The Chief of Staff grinned and said, Fasten your lapstrap. The red light went on above M's door. Bond walked through. Here it was entirely peaceful. M sat relaxed, sideways to his desk, looking out of the broad window at the distant glittering fretwork of London's skyline. He glanced up. Sit down, 007. Have a look at these. He reached out and slid some foolscap-sized photostats across the desk. Take your time. He picked up his pipe and began to fill it, absent-minded fingers dipping into the shell-based tobacco jar at his elbow. Bond picked up the top photostat. It showed the front and back of an addressed envelope dusted for fingerprints, which were all over its surface. M glanced sideways. Smoke, if you like. Bond said, Thanks, sir. I'm trying to give it up. M said, put his pipe in his mouth, struck a match, and inhaled a deep lungful of smoke. He settled himself deeper in his chair. The grey sailor's eyes gazed through the window introspectively, seeing nothing. The envelope, prefixed personal and most immediate, was addressed to the Prime Minister by name at No. 10 Downing Street, Whitehall, London, SW1. Every detail of the address was correct, down to the final PC, to denote that the Prime Minister was a Privy Councillor. The punctuation was meticulous. The stamp was postmarked Brighton, 8:30 a.m. on June the 3rd. It crossed Bond's mind that the letter might therefore have been posted under cover of night, and that it would probably have been delivered sometime in the early afternoon of the same day, yesterday. A typewriter with a bold, rather elegant type had been used. This fact, together with the generous 5 by 7.5-inch envelope and the spacing and style of the address, gave a solid, business-like impression. The back of the envelope showed nothing but fingerprints. There was no sealing wax. The letter, equally correct and well laid out, ran as follows. Mr. Prime Minister, you should be aware, or you will be if you communicate with the Chief of the Air Staff, that, since approximately 10 p.m. yesterday, June the 2nd, a British aircraft carrying 2 atomic weapons is overdue on a training flight. The aircraft is Villiers Vindicator O/NBR from No. 5 RAF Experimental Squadron based at Boscombe Down. The Ministry of Supply identification numbers on the atomic weapons are MOS-BD 654 Mark V and MOS-BD 655 Mark V. There are also USAF identification numbers in such profusion and of such prolixity that I will not weary you with them. This aircraft was on a NATO training flight with a crew of 5 and 1 observer. It carried sufficient fuel for 10 hours flying at 600 miles per hour at a mean altitude of 40,000 feet. This aircraft, together with the 2 atomic weapons, is now in the possession of this organization. The crew and the observer are deceased, and you have our authority to inform the next of kin accordingly, thus assisting you in preserving, on the grounds that the aircraft has crashed, the degree of secrecy you will no doubt wish to maintain, and which will be equally agreeable to ourselves. The whereabouts of this aircraft and of the 2 atomic weapons, rendering them possible of recovery, will be communicated to you in exchange for the equivalent of £100 million in gold bullion, 1,000 or not less than 999 fine. Instructions for the delivery of the gold are contained in the attached memorandum. A further condition is that the recovery and disposal of the gold will not be hampered, and that a free pardon, under your personal signature and that of the President of the United States, will be issued in the name of this organization and all its members. Failure to accept these conditions within 7 days from 5 p.m. GMT on June the 3rd, 1959, i.e., not later than 5 p.m. GMT on June the 10th, 1959, will have the following consequences. Immediately after that date, a piece of property belonging to the Western Powers, valued at not less than the aforesaid £100 million, will be destroyed. There will be loss of life. If, within 48 hours after this warning, willingness to accept our terms is still not communicated, there will ensue, without further warning, the destruction of a major city situated in an undesignated country of the world. There will be very great loss of life. Moreover, between the two occurrences, this organization will reserve to itself the right to communicate to the world the 48-hour time limit. This measure, which will cause widespread panic in every major city, will be designed to hasten your hand. This, Mr. Prime Minister, is a single and final communication. We shall await your reply every hour on the hour GMT on the 16 megacycle waveband. Signed, Spectre, the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, and Extortion. James Bond read through the letter again and put it carefully down on the desk in front of him. He then turned to the second page, a detailed memorandum for the delivery of the gold. Northwestern slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily, Decca navigational aid transmitting on full moon period between midnight and 0100 GMT, individual quarter-ton consignments packed in 1-foot-thick foam rubber, minimum of 3 parachutes per consignment. Nature of planes and flight schedule to be communicated on the 16 megacycle waveband not later than 24 hours before the operation. Any countermeasures initiated will be considered a breach of contract and will result in the detonation of atomic weapon number 1 or number 2, as the case may be. The typed signature was the same. Both pages had one last line: copy to the President of the United States of America by registered airmail, posted simultaneously. Bond laid the photostat quietly down on top of the others. He reached into his hip pocket for the gunmetal cigarette case that now contained only 9 cigarettes, took one and lit it, drawing the smoke deep down into his lungs and letting it out with a long, reflective hiss. M swiveled his chair round so they were facing each other. "Well?" Bond noticed that M's eyes, 3 weeks before so clear and vital, were now bloodshot and strained. No wonder. He said, "If this plane and the weapons really are missing, I think it stands up, sir. I think they mean it. I think it's a true bill." M said, "So does the War Cabinet. So do I." He paused. "Yes, the plane with the bombs is missing, and the stock numbers on the bombs are correct." Chapter 8. Big Fleas Have Little Fleas. Bond said, "What is there to go on, sir?" "Damn little. Practically speaking, nothing. Nobody's ever heard of these Spectre people. We know there's some kind of independent unit working in Europe. We bought some stuff from them, so have the Americans, and Matisse admits now that Goltz, that French heavy water scientist who went over last year, was assassinated by them for big money as a result of an offer he got out of the blue. No names were mentioned. It was all done on the radio, the same 16 megacycles that's mentioned in the letter, to the Deuxième Communications section. Matisse accepted on the off chance. They did a neat job. Matisse paid up, a suitcase full of money left at a Michelin road sign on N1, but no one can tie them in with these Spectre people. When we and the Americans dealt, there were endless cutouts, really professional ones. Anyway, we were more interested in the end product than the people involved. We both paid a lot of money, but it was worth it. If it's the same group working this, they're a serious outfit, and I've told the PM so. But that's not the point. The plane is missing, and the 2 bombs, just as the letter says. All details exactly correct. The Vindicator was on a NATO training flight south of Ireland and out into the Atlantic. M reached for a bulky folder and turned over some pages. He found what he wanted. Yes, it was to be a 6-hour flight leaving Boscombe down at 8 p.m. and due back at 2 a.m. There was an RAF crew of 5 and a NATO observer, an Italian man called Patacchi, Giuseppe Patacchi, squadron leader in the Italian Air Force, seconded to NATO. Fine flyer, apparently, but they're checking on his background now. He was sent over here on a normal tour of duty. The top pilots from NATO have been coming over for months to get used to the Vindicator and the bomb release routines. This plane's apparently going to be used for the NATO long-range striking force. Anyway, M turned over a page. The plane was watched on the screen as usual, and all went well until it was west of Ireland at about 40,000 feet. Then, contrary to the drill, it came down to around 30,000 and got lost in the transatlantic air traffic. Bomber Command tried to get in touch, but the radio couldn't or wouldn't answer. The immediate reaction was that the Vindicator had hit one of the transatlantic planes, and there was something of a panic. But none of the companies reported any trouble or even a sighting. M looked across at Bond, and that was the end of it. The plane just vanished. Bond said, "Did the American DEW line pick it up, their Defense Early Warning System?" "There's a query on that. The only grain of evidence we've got. Apparently, about 500 miles east of Boston, there was some evidence that a plane had peeled off the inward route to Idlewild and turned south. But that's another big traffic lane, for the northern traffic from Montreal and Gander down to Bermuda and the Bahamas and South America. So these DEW operators just put it down as a BOAC or Trans-Canada plane. It certainly sounds as if they've got the whole thing worked out pretty well, hiding in these traffic lanes. Could the plane have turned northwards in the middle of the Atlantic and made for Russia?" "Yes, or southwards. There's a big block of space about 500 miles out from both shores that's out of radar range. Better still, it could have turned on its tracks and come back into Europe on any of 2 or 3 air lanes. In fact, it could be almost anywhere in the world by now. That's the point. But it's a huge plane. It must need special runways and so on. It must have come down somewhere. You can't hide a plane of that size." "Just so. All these things are obvious. By midnight last night, the RAF had checked with every single airport, everyone in the world that could have taken it. Negative. But the CAS says of course it could be crash-landed in the Sahara, for instance, or on some other desert, or in the sea, in shallow water. Wouldn't that explode the bombs? No. They're absolutely safe until they're armed. Apparently, even a direct drop, like that one from the B-47 over North Carolina in 1958, would only explode the TNT trigger to the thing, not the plutonium. How are these Spectre people going to explode them, then?" M spread his hands. "They explained all this at the War Cabinet meeting. I don't understand it all, but apparently an atomic bomb looks just like any other bomb. The way it works is that the nose is full of ordinary TNT with the plutonium in the tail. Between the two, there's a hole into which you screw some sort of detonator, a kind of plug. When the bomb hits, the TNT ignites the detonator, and the detonator sets off the plutonium. So these people would have to drop the bomb to set it off? Apparently not. They would need a man with good physics knowledge who understood the thing. But then all he'd have to do would be to unscrew the nose cone on the bomb, the ordinary detonator that sets off the TNT, and fix on some kind of time fuse that would ignite the TNT without it being dropped. That would set the thing off. And it's not a very bulky affair. You could get the whole thing into something only about twice the size of a big golf bag. Very heavy, of course. But you could put it into the back of a big car, for instance, and just run the car into a town and leave it parked with the time fuse switched on. Give yourself a couple of hours' start to get out of range, at least 100 miles away, and that would be that." Bond reached in his pocket for another cigarette. It couldn't be, yet it was so. Just what his service and all the other intelligence services in the world had been expecting to happen. The anonymous little man in the raincoat with a heavy suitcase, or golf bag, if you like. The left luggage office, the parked car, the clump of bushes in a park in the centre of a big town, and there was no answer to it. In a few years' time, if the experts were right, there would be even less answer to it. Every tin-pot little nation would be making atomic bombs in their backyard, so to speak. Apparently there was no secret now about the things. It had only been the prototypes that had been difficult, like the first gunpowder weapons, for instance, or machine guns, or tanks. Today, these were everybody's bows and arrows. Tomorrow, or the day after, the bows and arrows would be atomic bombs. And this was the first blackmail case. Unless Spectre was stopped, the word would get round, and soon Every criminal scientist with a chemical set and some scrap iron would be doing it. If they couldn't be stopped in time, there would be nothing for it but to pay up. Bond said so. "That's about it," commented M. "From every point of view, including politics. Not that they matter all that much, but neither the PM nor the President would last 5 minutes if anything went wrong. But whether we pay or don't pay, the consequences will be endless, and all bad. That's why absolutely everything has got to be done to find these people and the plane and stop the thing in time. The PM and the President are entirely agreed. Every intelligence man all over the world who's on our side is being put onto this operation. Operation Thunderball, they're calling it. Planes, ships, submarines, and of course, money's no object. We can have everything whenever we want it. The Cabinet have already set up a special staff and a war room. Every scrap of information will be fed into it. The Americans have done the same. Some kind of a leak can't be helped. It's being put about that all the panic, and it is panic, is because of the loss of the Vindicator, bombs included, whatever fuss that may cause politically. Only the letter will be absolutely secret. All the usual detective work, fingerprints, Brighton, writing paper, these'll be looked after by Scotland Yard, with the FBI, Interpol and all the NATO intelligence organisations helping where they can. Only a segment of the paper and the typing will be used. A few innocent words. This will all be quite separate from the search for the plane. That'll be handled as a top espionage matter. No one should be able to connect the two investigations. MI5 will handle the background to all the crew members and the Italian observer. That will be a natural part of the search for the plane. As for the service, we've teamed up with the CIA to cover the world. Alan Dulles is putting every man he's got onto it, and so am I. Just sent out a general call. Now, all we can do is sit back and wait. Bond lit another cigarette, his sinful third in 1 hour. He said, putting unconcern into his voice, "Where do I come in, sir?" M looked vaguely at Bond, as if seeing him for the first time. Then he swiveled his chair and gazed again through the window at nothing. Finally, he said in a conversational tone of voice, "I have committed a breach of faith with the PM in telling you all this, 007. I was under oath to tell no one what I have just told you. I decided to do what I have done because I have an idea, a hunch, and I wish this idea to be pursued by he hesitated, by a reliable man. It seemed to me that the only grain of possible evidence in this case was the DEW radar plot, a doubtful one, I admit, of the plane that left the east-west air channel over the Atlantic and turned south towards Bermuda and the Bahamas. I decided to accept this evidence, although it has not aroused much interest elsewhere. I then spent some time studying a map and charts of the Western Atlantic, and I endeavoured to put myself in the minds of Spectre, or rather, for there is certainly a mastermind behind all this, in the mind of the chief of Spectre, my opposite number, so to speak. And I came to certain conclusions. I decided that a favourable target for bomb number 1 and for bomb number 2, if it comes to that, would be in America rather than in Europe. To begin with, the Americans are more bomb-conscious than we in Europe, and therefore more susceptible to persuasion if it came to using bomb number 2. Installations worth more than £100 million, and thus targets for bomb number 1, are more numerous in America than in Europe. And finally, guessing that Spectre is a European organisation, from the style of the letter and from the paper, which is Dutch, by the way, and also from the ruthlessness of the plot, it seemed to me at least possible that an American rather than a European target might have been chosen. Anyway, going on these assumptions and assuming that the plane could not have landed in America itself, or off American shores, the coastal radar network is too good, I looked for a neighbouring area which might be suitable. And, M glanced round at Bond and away again, I decided on the Bahamas. The group of islands, many of them uninhabited, surrounded mostly by shoal water over sand, and possessing only one simple radar station. and that one concerned only with civilian air traffic and manned by local civilian personnel. South, towards Cuba, Jamaica, and the Caribbean, offers no worthwhile targets. Anyway, it is too far from the American coastline. Northwards, towards Bermuda, has the same disadvantages. But the nearest of the Bahama group is only 200 miles, only 6 or 7 hours in a fast motorboat or yacht from the American coastline. Bond interrupted. If you're right, sir, why didn't Spectre send their letter to the President instead of the PM? For the sake of obscurity. To make us do what we are doing, hunting all round the world instead of only in one part of it. And for maximum impact. Spectre would realize that the arrival of the letter right on top of the loss of the bomber would hit us in the solar plexus. It might, they would reason, even shake the money out of us without any further effort. The next stage of their operation, attacking target number 1, is going to be a nasty business for them. It's going to expose their whereabouts to a considerable extent. They'd like to collect the money and close the operation as quickly as possible. That's what we've got to gamble on. We've got to push them as close to the use of number 1 bomb as we dare, in the hope that something will betray them in the next 6 3/4 days. It's a slim chance. I'm pinning my hopes on my guess. M swung his chair round to the desk. And on you. Well, he looked hard at Bond. Any comments? If not, you'd better get started. You're booked on all New York planes from now until midnight, then on by BOAC. I thought of using an RAF Canberra, but I don't want your arrival to make any noise. You're a rich young man looking for some property in the islands. That'll give you an excuse to do as much prospecting as you want. Well? All right, sir. Bond got to his feet. I'd rather have had somewhere more interesting. The Iron Curtain beat, for instance. I can't help feeling this is a bigger operation than a small unit could take on. For my money, this looks more like a Russian job. They get the experimental plane and the bombs. They obviously want them, and throw dust in our eyes with all this Spectre ballyhoo. If Smersh was still in business, I'd say they'd got a finger in it somewhere, just their style. But the eastern stations may pick up something on that if there's anything in the idea. Anything else, sir? Who do I cooperate with in Nassau? The governor knows you're coming. They've got a well-trained police force. CIA are sending down a good man, I gather, with a communications outfit. They've got more of that sort of machinery than we have. Take a cipher machine with the XXX setting. I want to hear every single detail you turn up, personal to me, right? Right, sir. Bond went to the door and let himself out. There was nothing more to be said. This looked like the biggest job the service had ever been given, and in Bond's opinion, for he didn't give much for M's guess, he had been relegated to the back row of the chorus. So be it. He would get himself a good sunburn and watch the show from the wings. When Bond walked out of the building, carrying the neat leather cipher case, an expensive movie camera perhaps slung over his shoulder, the man in the beige Volkswagen stopped scratching the burn scab under his shirt, loosened, for the 10th time, the long-barreled .45 in the holster under his arm, started the car, and put it in gear. He was 20 yards behind Bond's parked Bentley. He had no idea what the big building was. He had simply obtained Bond's home address from the receptionist at Shrublands, and as soon as he got out of the Brighton hospital, he had carefully tailed Bond. The car was hired under an assumed name. When he had done what had to be done, he would go straight to London Airport and take the first plane out to any country on the continent. Count Lippe was a sanguine individual. The job, the private score he had to settle, presented no problem to him. He was a ruthless, vengeful man, and he had eliminated many obstreperous and perhaps dangerous people in his life. He reasoned that, if they ever came to hear of this, Spectre would not object. The overheard telephone conversation on that first day at the clinic showed that his cover had been broached, however slightly, and it was just conceivable that he could be traced through his membership of the Red Lightning Tong. From there to Spectre was a long step, but Sub-Operator G knew that once a cover began to run, it ran like an old sock. Apart from that, this man must be paid off. Count Lippe had to be quits with him. Bond was getting into his car. He had slammed the door. Sub-Operator G watched the blue smoke curl from the twin exhausts. He got moving. On the other side of the road and 100 yards behind the Volkswagen, Spectre number 6 slipped his goggles down over his eyes, stamped the 500cc Triumph into gear, and accelerated down the road. He swerved neatly through the traffic. He had been a test rider for DKW at one time in his post-war career, and stationed himself 10 yards behind the off-rear wheel of the Volkswagen and just out of the driver's line of vision in the windscreen mirror. He had no idea why Subcontractor G was following the Bentley, nor who the Bentley belonged to. His job was to kill the driver of the Volkswagen. He put his hand into the leather satchel he carried slung over his shoulder, took out the heavy grenade — it was twice the normal military size — and watched the traffic ahead for the right pattern to allow his getaway. Sub-Operator G was watching for a similar pattern. He also noted the spacing of the lampposts on the pavement in case he might be blocked and have to run off the road. Now the cars ahead were sparse. He stamped his foot onto the floor and, driving with his left hand, drew out the Colt with his right. Now he was up with the Bentley's rear bumper. Now he was alongside. The dark profile was a sitting target. With a last quick glance ahead, he raised the gun. It was the cheeky iron rattle of the Volkswagen's air-cooled engine that made Bond turn his head, and it was this minute reduction of the target area that saved his jaw. If he had then accelerated, the second bullet would have got him, but some blessed instinct made his foot stamp the brake, at the same time as his head ducked so swiftly that his chin hit the horn button, nearly knocking him out. Almost simultaneously, instead of a third shot, there came the roar of an explosion, and the remains of his windscreen, already shattered, cascaded around him. The Bentley had stopped. The engine stalled. Brakes screamed. There were shouts and the panicky screams of horns. Bond shook his head and cautiously raised it. The Volkswagen, one wheel still spinning, lay on its side in front of and broadside to the Bentley. Most of the roof had been blown off. Inside, and half sprawling into the road, was a horrible, glinting mess. Flames were licking at the blistered paintwork. People were gathering. Bond pulled himself together and got quickly out of his car. He shouted, "Stand back! The petrol tank'll go!" Almost as he said the words, there came a dull boom and a cloud of black smoke. The flames spurted. In the distance, sirens sounded. Bond edged through the people and strode quickly back towards his headquarters, his thoughts racing. The inquiry made Bond lose 2 planes to New York. By the time the police had put out the fire and had transported the bits of man and the bits of machinery and bomb casing to the morgue, it was quite clear that they would have nothing to go on but the shoes, the number on the gun, some fibres and shreds of clothing, and the car. The car hire people remembered nothing but a man with dark glasses, a driver's license in the name of Johnston, and a handful of fivers. The car had been hired 3 days before for 1 week. Plenty of people remembered the motorcyclist, but it seemed that he had no rear number plate. He had gone like a bat out of hell towards Baker Street. He wore goggles, medium build, nothing else. Bond had not been able to help. He had seen nothing of the Volkswagen driver. The roof of the Volkswagen had been too low. There had only been a hand and the glitter of a gun. The Secret Service asked for a copy of the police report, and M instructed that this should be sent to the Thunderball war room. He saw Bond briefly again, rather impatiently, as if it had all been Bond's fault. Then he told Bond to forget about it. It was probably something to do with one of his past cases, a hangover of some kind. The police would get to the bottom of it in time. The main thing was Operation Thunderball. Bond had better get a move on. By the time Bond left the building for the second time, it had begun to rain. One of the mechanics from the carpool at the back of the building had done what he could, knocking out the remains of the Bentley's windscreen and cleaning the bits out of the car, but when he got home at lunchtime, Bond was soaked to the skin. He left the car in a nearby garage, telephoned Rolls and his insurance company. He had got too close to a lorry carrying steel lengths, for reinforced concrete, presumably. No, he had not got the lorry's number. Sorry, but you know how it is when these things happen all of a sudden. And then went home and had a bath and changed into his dark blue tropical worsted. He packed carefully. one large suitcase and a hold-all for his underwater swimming gear, and went through to the kitchen. May was looking rather contrite. It seemed as if she might make another speech. Bond held up his hand. "Don't tell me, May, you were right. I can't do my work on carrot juice. I've got to be off in an hour, and I need some proper food. Be an angel and make me your kind of scrambled eggs. 4 eggs. 4 rashers of that American hickory smoked bacon if we've got any left. Hot buttered toast, your kind, not wholemeal. And a big pot of coffee, double strength. And bring in the drink tray." May looked at him, relieved but aghast. "Whatever happened, Mr. James?" Bond laughed at the expression on her face. "Nothing, May. It just occurred to me that life's too short. Plenty of time to watch the calories when one goes to heaven." Bond left May tut-tutting at this profanity and went off to look to his armament. Chapter 9. Multiple Requiem. So far as Spectre was concerned, Plan Omega had gone exactly as Blofeld had known it would, and Phases 1 to 3 in their entirety had been completed on schedule and without a hitch. Giuseppe Patacchi, the late Giuseppe Patacchi, had been well chosen. At the age of 18, he had been co-pilot of a Focke-Wulf 200 from the Adriatic Anti-Submarine Patrol, one of the few hand-picked Italian airmen who had been allowed to handle these German planes. The group was issued with the latest German pressure mines, charged with a new hexagen explosive, just when the tide had turned in the Allied battle up the spine of Italy. Patacchi had known where his destiny lay and had gone into business for himself. On a routine patrol, he had shot the pilot and the navigator very carefully, with 138 bullet in the back of the head for each of them, and had brought the big plane skimming in just above the waves to avoid the anti-aircraft fire to the harbour of Bari. Then he had hung his shirt out of the cockpit as a token of surrender and had waited for the RAF launch. He had been decorated by the English and the Americans for this exploit, and had been awarded £10,000 from special funds for his presentation to the Allies of the pressure mine. He had told a highly coloured story to the intelligence people of having been a one-man resistance ever since he had been old enough to join the Italian Air Force, and he emerged at the end of the war as one of Italy's most gallant resistance heroes. From then on, life had been easy. Pilot and later captain in Alitalia when it got going again, and then back into the new Italian Air Force as colonel. His secondment to NATO followed, and then his appointment as one of the 6 Italians chosen for the advanced striking force. But he was now 34, and it occurred to him that he had had just about enough of flying. He especially did not care for the idea of being part of the spearhead of NATO defences. It was time for younger men to provide the heroics. And all his life he had had a passion for owning things, flashy, exciting, expensive things. He had most of what he desired: a couple of gold cigarette cases, a solid gold Rolex Oyster perpetual chronometer on a flexible gold bracelet, a white convertible Lancia Gran Turismo, plenty of sharp clothes, and all the girls he wanted. He had once been briefly married, but it had not been a success. Now he desired, and what he desired he often got, a particular gear-bodied 3500 GT Maserati he had seen at the Milan Motor Show. He also wanted out of the pale green corridors of NATO, out of the Air Force, and therefore off to new worlds with a new name. Rio de Janeiro sounded just right. But all this meant a new passport, plenty of money, and organismo, the vital organismo. The organismo turned up bearing just those gifts that Patacchi lusted for. It came in the shape of an Italian named Fonda, who was, at that time, number 4 in Spectre, and who had been casing the personnel of NATO via Versailles and Paris nightclubs and restaurants for just such a man. It had taken one whole very careful month to prepare the bait and inch it forward towards the fish, and when it was finally presented, number 4 had been almost put off by the greed with which it had been gobbled. There was a delay while the possibility of a double cross was probed by Spectre. But finally, all the lights were green, and the full proposition was laid out for inspection. Patacchi was to get on the Vindicator training course and hijack the plane. There was no mention of atomic weapons. This was a Cuban revolutionary group who wanted to call attention to its existence and aims by a dramatic piece of self-advertisement. Pataki closed his ears to this specious tale. He didn't mind in the least who wanted the plane, so long as he was paid. In exchange, Pataki would receive $1 million, a new passport in any name and nationality he chose, and immediate onward passage from the point of delivery to Rio de Janeiro. Many details were discussed and perfected, and when, at 8 o'clock in the evening of that June the 2nd, the Vindicator screamed off down the runway and out over St. Albans Head, Pataki was tense, but confident. For the training flights, a couple of ordinary civil aircraft seats had been fixed inside the roomy fuselage just back of the large cockpit, and Pataki sat quietly for a whole hour and watched the 5 men at work at the crowded dials and instruments. When it came to his turn to fly the plane, he was quite satisfied that he could dispense with all 5 of them. Once he had set George, there would be nothing to do but stay awake and make certain from time to time that he was keeping exactly at 32,000 feet, just above the transatlantic air channel. There would be a tricky moment when he turned off the east-west channel onto the north-south for the Bahamas, but this had all been worked out for him, and every move he would have to make was written down in the notebook in his breast pocket. The landing was going to need very steady nerves, but for $1 million, the steady nerves would be summoned. For the 10th time, Pataki consulted the Rolex. Now. He verified and tested the oxygen mask in the bulkhead beside him and laid it down ready. Next, he took the little red-ringed cylinder out of his pocket and remembered exactly how many turns to give the release valve. Then he put it back in his pocket and went through into the cockpit. "Hello, Seppi. Enjoying the flight?" The pilot liked the Italian. They had gone out together on 1 or 2 majestic thrashes in Bournemouth. Sure. Pataki asked some questions, verified the course set on George, checked the airspeed and altitude. Now everyone in the cockpit was relaxed, almost drowsy. 5 more hours to go. Rather a bind missing north by northwest at the Odeon, but one would catch up with it at Southampton. Pataki stood with his back to the metal map rack that held the log and the charts. His right hand went to his pocket, felt for the release valve, and gave it 3 complete turns. He eased the cylinder out of his pocket and slipped it behind him and down behind the books. Pataki stretched and yawned. "It's time for Aziz," he said amiably. He had got the slang phrase pat. It rolled easily off the tongue. The navigator laughed. "What do they call it in Italian? Zizzo?" Pataki grinned cheerfully. He went through the open hatch, got back to his chair, clamped on his oxygen mask, and turned the control regulator to 100% oxygen to cut out the air bleed. Then he made himself comfortable and watched. They had said it would take under 5 minutes. Sure enough, in about 2 minutes, the man nearest to the map rack, the navigator, suddenly clutched his throat and fell forward, gargling horribly. The radio operator dropped his earphones and started forward, but with his second step he was down on his knees. He lurched sideways and collapsed. Now the 3 other men began to fight for air, briefly, terribly. The co-pilot and the flight engineer writhed off their stools together. They clawed vaguely at each other, and then fell back, spread-eagled. The pilot groped up towards the microphone above his head, said something indistinctly, got half to his feet, turned slowly so that his bulging eyes, already dead, seemed to stare through the hatchway into Pataki's, and then thudded down on top of the body of his co-pilot. Pataki glanced at his watch. 4 minutes flat. Give them 1 more minute. When the minute was up, he took rubber gloves out of his pocket, put them on, and pressing the oxygen mask tight against his face and trailing the flexible tube behind him, he went forward, reached down into the map rack, and closed the valve on the cylinder of cyanide. He verified George and adjusted the cabin pressurization to help clear the poison gas. He then went back to his seat to wait for 15 minutes. They had said 15 would be enough, but at the last moment he gave it another 10, and then, still with his oxygen mask on, he went forward again and began slowly, for the oxygen made him rather breathless, to pull the bodies back into the fuselage. When the cockpit was clear, he took a small phial of crystals out of his trousers pocket, took out the cork, and sprinkled the cabin floor with them. He went down on his knees and watched the crystals. They kept their white colour. He eased his oxygen mask away and took a small, cautious sniff. There was no smell. But still, when he took over the controls and began easing the plane down to 32,000 and then slightly northwest by west to get into the traffic lane, he kept the mask on. The giant plane whispered on into the night. The cockpit, bright with the yellow eyes of the dials, was quiet and warm. In the deafening silence in the cockpit of a big jet in flight, there was only the faint buzz of an invector. As he verified the dials, the click of each switch seemed as loud as a small-caliber pistol shot. Pataki again checked George with the gyro and verified each fuel tank to see that they were all feeding evenly. One tank pump needed adjustment. The jet pipe temperatures were not overheating. Satisfied, Pataki settled himself comfortably in the pilot's seat and swallowed a Benzedrine tablet and thought about the future. One of the headphones scattered on the floor of the cockpit began to chirrup loudly. Pataki glanced at his watch. Of course, Boscombe Air Traffic Control was trying to raise the Vindicator. He had missed the third of the half-hourly calls. How long would Air Control wait before alerting Air Sea Rescue, Bomber Command, and the Air Ministry? There would first be checks and double-checks with the Southern Rescue Centre. They would probably take another half hour, and by that time he would be well out over the Atlantic. The chirrup of the headphones went quiet. Pataki got up from his seat and took a look at the radar screen. He watched it for some time, noting the occasional blip of planes being overhauled below him. Would his own swift passage above the air corridor be noted by the planes as he passed above them? Unlikely. The radar on commercial planes has a limited field of vision in a forward cone. He would almost certainly not be spotted until he crossed the defense early warning line, and DEW would probably put him down as a commercial jet that had strayed above its normal channel. Pataki went back to the pilot's seat and again minutely checked the dials. He weaved the plane gently to get the feel of the controls. Behind him, the bodies on the floor of the fuselage stirred uneasily. The plane answered perfectly. It was like driving a beautiful, quiet motorcar. Pataki dreamt briefly of the Maserati. What colour? Better not his usual white or anything spectacular. Dark blue with a thin red line along the coachwork. Something quiet and respectable that would fit in with his new, quiet identity. It would be fun to run her in some of the trials and road races, even the Mexican 2000. But that would be too dangerous. Supposing he won and his picture got into the papers? No. He would have to cut out anything like that. He would only drive the car really fast when he wanted to get a girl. They melted in a fast car. Why was that? The sense of surrender to the machine, to the man whose strong, sunburnt hands were on the wheel. But it was always so. You turned the car into a wood after 10 minutes at 150, and you would almost have to lift the girl out and lay her down on the moss. Her limbs would be so trembling and soft. Pataki pulled himself out of the daydream. He glanced at his watch. The Vindicator was already 4 hours out. At 600 mph, one certainly covered the miles. The coastline of America should be on the screen by now. He got up and had a look. Yes, there, 500 miles away, was the coastline map already in high definition, the bulge that was Boston, and the silvery creek of the Hudson River. No need to check his position with weatherships Delta or Echo that would be somewhere below him. He was dead on course, and it would soon be time to turn off the east-west channel. Pataki went back to his seat, munched another Benzedrine tablet, and consulted his chart. He got his hands to the controls and watched the eerie glow of the gyro compass. Now. He eased the controls gently round in a fairly tight curve, then he flattened out again, edged the plane exactly onto its new course, and reset George. Now he was flying due south. Now he was on the last lap, a bare 3 hours to go. It was time to start worrying about the landing. Pataki took out his little notebook. Watch for the lights of Grand Bahama to port and Palm Beach to starboard. Be ready to pick up the navigational aids from number one's yacht. ... Jettison fuel, lose height to around 1,000 feet for the last quarter of an hour, kill speed with the air brakes, and lose more height. Watch out for the flashing red beacon, and prepare for the final approach. Flaps down only at the check altitude with about 140 knots indicated. Depth of water will be 40 feet. You will have plenty of time to get out of the escape hatch. You will be taken on board number 1's yacht. There is a Bahamas Airways flight to Miami at 8:30 on the next morning, and then Braniff or Real Airlines for the rest of the way. Number 1 will give you the money in $1,000 bills or in traveller's checks. He will have both available. Also the passport in the name of Enrico Valli, company director. Pataki checked his position, course, and speed. Only 1 more hour to go. It was 3 a.m. GMT, 9 p.m. Nassau time. A full moon was coming up, and the carpet of clouds 10,000 feet below was a snowfield. Pataki doused the collision lights on his wingtips and fuselage. He checked the fuel. He would need 500 for the last 400 miles. He pulled the release valve on the reserve tanks and lost 1,000 gallons. With the loss of weight, the plane began to climb slowly, and he corrected back to 32,000 feet. Now there was 20 minutes to go. Time to begin the long descent. Down through the cloud base, the moments of blindness, and then, far below, the sparse lights of North and South Bimini winked palely against the silver sheen of the moon on the quiet sea. There were no whitecaps. The Met report he had picked up from Vero Beach on the American mainland had been right. Dead calm, light airs from the northeast, visibility good, no immediate likelihood of change, and a check on the fainter Nassau radio had confirmed. The sea looked as smooth and as solid as steel. This was going to be all right. Pataki dialed channel 67 on the pilot's command set to pick up number 1's navigational aid. He had a moment's panic when he didn't hit it at once, but then he got it, faint but clear. ... It was time to get right down. Pataki began to kill his speed with the air brakes and cut down the 4 jets. The great plane began a shallow dive. The radio altimeter became vocal, threatening. Pataki watched it, and the sea of quicksilver below him. He had a moment when the horizon was lost. There was so much reflection off the moonlit water. Then he was on and over a small dark island. It gave him confidence in the 2,000 feet indicated on the altimeter. He pulled out of the shallow dive and held the plane steady. Now, number 1's beacon was coming in loud and clear. Soon he would see the red flashing light. And there it was, perhaps 5 miles dead ahead. Pataki inched the great nose of the plane down. Any moment now. It was going to be easy. His fingers played with the controls as delicately as if they were the erotic trigger points on a woman. 500 feet, 400, 3, 2. There was the pale shape of the yacht, lights doused. He was dead on line with the red flash of the beacon. Would he hit it? Never mind. Inch her down, down, down. Be ready to switch off at once. The belly of the plane gave a jolt. Up with the nose, crash. A leap in the air, and then crash again. Pataki unhinged his cramped fingers from the controls and gazed numbly out of the window at the foam and small waves. By God, he had done it. He, Giuseppe Pataki, had done it. Now for the applause. Now for the rewards. The plane was settling slowly, and there was a hiss of steam from the submerging jets. From behind him came the rip and crack of tearing metal as the tail section gaped open where the back of the plane had broken. Pataki went through into the fuselage. The water swirled around his feet. The filtering moonlight glittered white on the upturned face of one of the corpses, now soggily awash at the rear of the plane. Pataki broke the perspex cover to the handle of the portside emergency exit and jerked the handle down. The door fell outwards, and Pataki stepped through and walked out along the wing. The big jolly boat was almost up with the plane. There were 6 men in it. Pataki waved and shouted delightedly. One man raised a hand in reply. The faces of the men, milk-white under the moon, looked up at him quietly, curiously. Pataki thought, these men are very serious, very businesslike. It is right so. He swallowed his triumph and also looked grave. The boat came alongside the wing, now almost awash, and one man climbed up on the wing and walked towards him. He was a short, thick man with a very direct gaze. He walked carefully, his feet well apart, and his knees flexed to keep his balance. His left hand was hooked in his belt. Pataki said happily, "Good evening, good evening. I am delivering one plane in good condition." He had thought the joke out long before. "Please sign here." He held out his hand. The man from the jolly boat took the hand in a strong grasp, braced himself, and pulled sharply. Pataki's head was flung back by the quick jerk, and he was looking full into the eyes of the moon as the stiletto flashed up and under the offered chin, through the roof of the mouth, into the brain. He knew nothing but a moment's surprise, a sear of pain, and an explosion of brilliant light. The killer held in the knife for a moment, the back of his hand feeling the stubble on Pataki's chin. Then he lowered the body onto the wing and withdrew the knife. He carefully rinsed the knife in the seawater and wiped the blade on Pataki's back and put the knife away. Then he hauled the body along the wing and thrust it under water beside the escape hatch. The killer waded back along the wing to the waiting jolly boat and laconically raised a thumb. By now, 4 of the men had pulled on their aqualungs. One by one, with the last adjustment of their mouthpieces, they clumsily heaved themselves over the side of the rocking boat and sank in a foam of small bubbles. When the last man had gone, the mechanic at the engine carefully lowered a huge underwater searchlight over the side and paid out the cable. At a given moment, he switched the light on, and the sea and the great sinking hulk of the plane were lit up with a mist of luminescence. The mechanic slipped the idling motor into gear and backed away, paying out cable as he went. At 20 yards, out of range of the suction of the sinking plane, he stopped and switched off his engine. He reached into his overalls and took out a packet of Camels. He offered one to the killer, who took it, broke it carefully in half, put one half behind his ear, and lit the other half. The killer was a man who rigidly controlled his weaknesses. Chapter 10. The Disco Volante. On board the yacht, Number 1 put down his night glasses, took a Charvet handkerchief out of the breast pocket of his white sharkskin jacket, and dabbed gently at his forehead and temples. The musky scent of Schiaparelli's snuff was reassuring, reminding him of the easy side of life, of Dominetta, who would now be sitting down to dinner. Everyone kept Spanish hours in Nassau, and cocktails would not have finished before 10. With the raffish but rather gay Saumurs and their equally frivolous guests, of the early game that would already be underway at the casino, of the calypsos thudding into the night from the bars and nightclubs on Bay Street. He put the handkerchief back in his pocket. But this was also good, this wonderful operation. Like clockwork. He glanced at his watch. Just 10:15. The plane had been a bare 30 minutes late, a nasty half-hour to have to wait, but the landing had been perfect. Vargas had done a good quick job on the Italian pilot. What was his name? So that now they were running only 15 minutes late. If the recovery group didn't have to use oxyacetylene cutters to get out the bombs, they would soon make that up. But one mustn't expect no hitch at all. There was a good 8 hours of darkness to go. Calm, method, efficiency. In that order. Calm, method, efficiency. Number 1 ducked down off the bridge and went into the radio cabin. It smelt of sweat and tension. Anything from the Nassau control tower? Any report of a low-flying plane? Of a possible crash into the sea off Bimini? Then keep watching, and get me number 2. Quick, please. It's just on the quarter. Number 1 lit a cigarette and watched the yacht's big brain get to work, scanning the ether, listening, searching. The operator played the dials with insect fingers, pausing, verifying, hastening on through the sound waves of the world. Now he suddenly stopped, checked, minutely adjusted the volume. He raised his thumb. Number 1 spoke into the little sphere of wire mesh that rose in front of his mouth from the base of the headset. Number 1 speaking. Number 2 listening. The voice was hollow. The words waxed and waned. But it was Blofeld, all right. Number 1 knew that voice better than he remembered his father's. Successful. 10:15. Next phrase 10:45. Continuing. Over. Thank you. Out. The sound waves went dead. The interchange had taken 45 seconds. No conceivable fear of interception in that time, on that waveband. Number 1 went through the big stateroom and down into the hold. The 4 men of B-Team, their aqualungs beside them, were sitting around smoking. The wide underwater hatch just above the keel of the yacht was open. Moonlight, reflected off the white sand under the ship, shone up through the 6 feet of water in the hold. Stacked on the grating beside the men was the thick pile of tarpaulin, painted a very pale café au lait, with occasional irregular blotches of dark green and brown. Number 1 said, "All is going very well. The recovery team is at work. It should not be long now. How about the chariot and the sled?" One of the men jerked his thumb downwards. "They are down there, outside on the sand, so it will be quicker." "Correct." Number 1 nodded towards a crane-like contraption, fastened to a bulkhead above the hold. "The derrick took the strain all right?" "That chain could handle twice the weight." "The pumps?" "In order. They will clear the hold in 7 minutes." "Good. Well, take it easy. It will be a long night." Number 1 climbed the iron ladder out of the hold and went up on deck. He didn't need his night glasses. 200 yards away to starboard, the sea was empty save for the jolly boat riding at anchor above the golden submarine glow. The red marker light had been taken in to the boat. The rattle of the little generator making current for the big searchlight was loud. It would carry far across a sea as still as this. But accumulators would have been too bulky and might have exhausted themselves before the work was finished. The generator was a calculated risk, and a small one at that. The nearest island was 5 miles away, and uninhabited, unless someone was having a midnight picnic on it. The yacht had stopped and searched it on the way to the rendezvous. Everything had been done that could be done, every precaution taken. The wonderful machine was running silently and full out. There was nothing to worry about now except the next step. Number 1 went through the hatch into the enclosed bridge and bent over the lighted chart table. Emilio Largo, Number 1, was a big, conspicuously handsome man of about 40. He was a Roman, and he looked like a Roman. Not from the Rome of today, but from the Rome of the ancient coins. The large, long face was sunburnt a deep mahogany brown, and the light glinted off the strong, rather hooked nose and the clean-cut lantern jaw that had been meticulously shaved before he had started out late that afternoon. In contrast to the hard, slow-moving brown eyes, the mouth, with its thick, rather down-curled lips, belonged to a satyr. Ears that from dead in front looked almost pointed, added to an animalness that would devastate women. The only weakness in the fine centurion face lay in the overlong sideburns and the too carefully waved-back hair that glistened so brightly with pomade that it might almost have been painted onto the skull. There was no fat on the big-boned frame. Largo had fought for Italy in the Olympic foils and was almost an Olympic-class swimmer with the Australian crawl, and only a month before had won the senior class in the Nassau Waterski Championships, and the muscles bulged under the exquisitely cut sharkskin jacket. An aid to his athletic prowess were his hands. They were almost twice the normal size, even for a man of his stature, and now, as they walked across the chart holding a ruler and a pair of dividers, they looked, extruding from the white sleeves that rested on the white chart, almost like large brown furry animals, quite separate from their owner. Largo was an adventurer, a predator on the herd. 200 years before, he would have been a pirate, not one of the jolly ones of the storybooks, but a man like Blackbeard, a blood-stained cutthroat who scythed his way through people towards gold. But Blackbeard had been too much of a bully and a roughneck, and wherever he went in the world he left behind a telltale shambles. Largo was different. There was a cool brain and an exquisite finesse behind his actions that had always saved him from the herd's revenge. From his post-war debut as head of the black market in Naples, through 5 lucrative years smuggling from Tangier, 5 more masterminding the wave of big jewel robberies on the French Riviera, down to his last 5, with Spectre. Always he got away with it. Always he had seen the essential step ahead that would have been hidden from lesser men. He was the epitome of the gentleman crook, a man of the world, a great womanizer, a high liver with the entree to cafe society in 4 continents, and the last survivor, conveniently enough, of a once famous Roman family whose fortune, so he said, he had inherited. He also benefited from having no wife, a spotless police record, nerves of steel, a heart of ice, and the ruthlessness of a Himmler. He was the perfect man for Spectre, and the perfect man, rich Nassau playboy and all, to be supreme commander of Plan Omega. One of the crew knocked on the hatch and came in. "As I have signalled, the chariot and sled are on the way." "Thank you." In the heat and excitement of any operation, Largo always created calm. However much was at stake, however great the dangers, and however urgent the need for speed and quick decisions, he made a fetish of calm, of the pause, of an almost judo-like inertia. This was an act of will to which he had trained himself. He found it had an extraordinary effect on his accomplices. It tied them to him, and invoked their obedience and loyalty more than any other factor in leadership. That he, a clever and cunning man, should show unconcern at particularly bad, or, as in this case, particularly good news, meant that he had already known what had happened would happen. With Largo, consequences were foreseen. One could depend on him. He never lost balance. So now, at this splendid news, Largo deliberately picked up his dividers again and made a trace, an imaginary trace, on the chart for the sake of the crew member. He then put down the dividers and strolled out of the air conditioning into the warm night. A tiny worm of underwater light was creeping out towards the jolly boat. It was a 2-man underwater chariot, identical with those used by the Italians during the war, and bought, with improvements, from Ansaldo, the firm that had originally invented the 1-man submarine. It was towing an underwater sled, a sharp-prowed tray with negative buoyancy used for the recovery and transport of heavy objects under the sea. The worm of light merged with the luminescence from the searchlight, and minutes later re-emerged on its way back to the ship. It would have been natural for Largo to have gone down to the hold to witness the arrival of the 2 atomic weapons. Typically, he did nothing of the sort. In due course, the little headlight reappeared, going back over its previous course. Now the sled would be loaded with a huge tarpaulin, camouflaged to merge in with just this piece of underwater terrain, with its white sand and patches of coral outcrop, that would be spread so as to cover every inch of the wrecked plane, and pegged all round with corkscrew iron stanchions that would not be shifted by the heaviest surface storm or groundswell. In his imagination, Largo saw every move of the 8 men who would now be working far below the surface on the reality for which there had been so much training, so many dummy exercises. He marveled at the effort, the incredible ingenuity that had gone into Plan Omega. Now all the months of preparation, of sweat and tears, were being repaid. There came a bright blink of light on the surface of the water, not far from the jolly boat. Then another and another. The men were surfacing. As they did so, the moon caught the glass of their masks. They swam to the boat. Largo verified that all 8 were there, and clumsily heaved up the short ladder and over the side. The mechanic and Brandt, the German killer, helped them off with their gear. The underwater light was switched off and hauled inboard, and, instead of the rattle of the generator, there came the muffled roar of the twin Johnstons. The boat sped back to the yacht and to the waiting arms of the derricks. The couplings were made firm and verified, and with a shrill electric whine, the boat, complete with passengers, was swung up and inboard. The captain came and stood at Largo's side. He was a big, sullen, raw-boned man who had been cashiered from the Canadian Navy for drunkenness and insubordination. He had been a slave to Largo ever since Largo had called him to the stateroom one day and broken a chair over his head on account of a questioned command. That was the kind of discipline he understood. Now he said, "The hold's clear. Okay to sail. Are both the teams satisfied?" "They say so. Not a hitch." "First, see they all get 1 full jigger of whiskey. Then tell them to rest. They will be going out again in just about an hour. Ask Kotze to have a word with me. Be ready to sail in 5 minutes. Okay. The eyes of the physicist, Kotzer, were bright under the moon. Largo noticed that he was trembling slightly, as if with fever. He tried to instill calm into the man. He said cheerfully, "Well, my friend, are you pleased with your toys? The toy shop has sent you everything you want?" Kotzer's lips trembled. He was on the verge of excited tears. He said, his voice high, "It is tremendous. You have no idea. Weapons such as I had never dreamt of, and of a simplicity, a safety. Even a child could handle these things without danger. The cradles were big enough for them. You have room to do your work?" "Yes, yes." Kotze almost flapped his hands with enthusiasm. "There are no problems. None at all. The fuses will be off in no time. It will be a simple matter to replace them with the time mechanism. Maslov is already at work correcting the threads. I'm using lead screws. They are more easy to machine." "And the two plugs? These igniters you were telling me about, they are safe. Where did the divers find them?" "They were in a leaden box under the pilot seat. I have verified them. Perfectly simple when the time comes. They will, of course, be kept apart in the hiding place. The rubber bags are splendid, just what was needed. I have verified that they seal completely watertight." "No danger from radiation?" "Not now. Everything is in the leaden cases." Kotzer shrugged. "I may have picked up a little while I was working on the monsters, but I wore the harness. I will watch for signs. I know what to do." "You are a brave man, Kotzer. I won't go near the damn things until I have to. I value my sex life too much." "So you are satisfied with everything? You have no problems? Nothing has been left on the plane?" Kotzer had got himself under control. He had been bursting with the news, with his relief that the technical problems were within his power. Now he felt empty, tired. He had voided himself of the tensions that had been with him for weeks. After all this planning, all these dangers, supposing his knowledge had not been enough. Supposing the bloody English had invented some new safety device, some secret control of which he knew nothing. But when the time came, when he unwrapped the protective webbing and got to work with his jeweler's tools, then triumph and gratitude had flooded into him. No. Now there were no problems. Everything was all right. Now there was only routine. Kotzer said dully, "No, there are no problems. Everything is there. I will go and get the job finished." Largo watched the thin figure shamble off along the deck. Scientists were queer fish. They saw nothing but science. Kotzer couldn't visualize the risks that still had to be run. For him, the turning of a few screws was the end of the job. For the rest of the time, he would be a useless supercargo. It would be easier to get rid of him. But that couldn't be done. Yet. He would have to be kept on just in case the weapons had to be used. But he was a depressing little man and a near hysteric. Largo didn't like such people near him. They lowered his spirits. They smelt of bad luck. Kotzer would have to be found some job in the engine room where he could be kept busy, and above all, out of sight. Largo went into the cockpit bridge. The captain was sitting at the wheel, a light aluminium affair consisting only of the bottom half of a circle. Largo said, "Okay, let's go." The captain reached out his hand to the bank of buttons at his side and pressed the one that said, "Start both." There came a low, hollow rumble from amidships. A light blinked on the panel to show that both engines were firing properly. The captain pulled the electromagnetic gear shift to slow ahead both, and the yacht began to move. The captain made it full ahead both, and the yacht trembled and settled a little in the stern. The captain watched the revolution counter, his hand on a squat lever at his side. At 20 knots, the counter showed 5,000. The captain inched back the lever that depressed the great steel scoop below the hull. The revolutions remained the same, but the finger of the speedometer crawled on round the dial until it said 40 knots. Now the yacht was half flying, half planing across the glittering sheet of still water. The hull supported 4 feet above the surface on the broad, slightly up-tilted metal skid, and with only a few feet of the stern and the 2 big screws submerged. It was a glorious sensation, and Largo, as he always did, thrilled to it. The motor yacht, Disco Volante, was a hydrofoil craft. Built for Largo with Spectre funds by the Italian constructors Leopoldo Rodriguez of Messina, the only firm in the world to have successfully adapted the Schertel-Saxenberg system to commercial use. With a hull of aluminium and magnesium alloy, 2 Daimler-Benz 4-stroke diesels supercharged by twin Brown Bovary turbo superchargers, the Disco Volante could move her 100 tons at around 50 knots, with a cruising range at that speed of around 400 miles. She had cost £200,000, but she had been the only craft in the world with the speed, cargo and passenger space, and with the essential shallow draft for the job required of her in Bahamian waters. The constructors claim of this type of craft that it has a particular refinement that Spectre had appreciated. Having high stability and a shallow draft, aliscafos, as they are called in Italy, do not determine magnetic field variation, nor do they cause pressure waves, both desirable characteristics in case the Disco Volante might wish, sometime in her career, to escape detection. 6 months before, the Disco had been shipped out to the Florida Keys by the South Atlantic route. She had been a sensation in Florida waters and among the Bahamas, and had vastly helped to make Largo the most popular millionaire in a corner of the world that crawls with millionaires who have everything. And the vast and mysterious voyages he made in the Disco, with all those underwater swimmers, and occasionally with a 2-seater Lycoming-engined folding-wing amphibian mounted on the roof of the streamlined superstructure, had aroused just the right amount of excited comment. Slowly, Largo had let the secret leak out, through his own indiscretions at dinners and cocktail parties, through carefully primed members of the crew in the Bay Street bars. This was a treasure hunt, an important one. There was a pirate's map, a sunken galleon thickly overgrown with coral. The wreck had been located. Largo was only waiting for the end of the winter tourist season and for the calms of early summer, and then his shareholders would be coming out from Europe, and work would begin in earnest. And 2 days before, the shareholders, 19 of them, had duly come trickling into Nassau by different routes, from Bermuda, from New York, from Miami. Rather dull-looking people, to be sure, just the sort of hard-headed, hard-working businessmen who would be amused by a gamble like this, a pleasant sunshine gamble, with a couple of weeks' holiday in Nassau to make up for it, if the doubloons were, after all, not in the wreck. And that evening, with all the visitors on board, the engines of the Disco had begun to murmur, just when they should have, the harbour folk agreed, just when it was getting dark, and the beautiful dark blue and white yacht had slid out of the harbour. Once in the open sea, the engines had started up their deep booming that had gradually diminished to the southeast, towards, the listeners agreed, an entirely appropriate hunting ground. The southerly course was considered appropriate because it is among the southern Bahamas that the great local treasure troves are expected to be found. It was through the southerly passages, through these islands, the Crooked Island, the Mayaguana and the Caicos passages, that the Spanish treasure ships would try to dodge the pirates and the French and British fleets as they made for home. Here, it is believed, lie the remains of the Porto Pedro, sunk in 1668 with £1 million of bullion on board. The Santa Cruz, lost in 1694, carried twice as much, and the El Capitan and San Pedro, both sunk in 1719, carried £1 million and £500,000 of treasure respectively. Every year, treasure hunts for these and other ships are carried out among the southern Bahamas. No one can guess how much, if anything, has been recovered, but everyone in Nassau knows of the £72 silver bar recovered by 2 Nassau businessmen off Gorda Quay in 1950, and since presented to the Nassau Development Board, in whose offices it is permanently on view. So all Bahamians know that treasure is there for the finding, and when the harbour folk of Nassau heard the deep boom of the Disco's engines dying away to the south, they nodded wisely. But once the Disco was well away, and the moon had not yet risen, with all lights doused, she swung away in a wide circle towards the west, and towards the rendezvous point she was now leaving. Now she was 100 miles, 2 hours away from Nassau, but it would be almost dawn when, after one more vital call, Nassau would again hear the boom of her engines coming in from the false southern trail. Largo got up and bent over the chart table. They had covered the course many times and in all weathers. It was really no problem. But phases 1 and 2 had gone so well that double care must be taken over phase 3. Yes, all was well. They were dead on course, 50 miles. They would be there in an hour. He told the captain to keep the yacht as she was and went below to the radio room. 11:15 was just coming up. It was call time. The small island, Dog Island, was no bigger than 2 tennis courts. It was a hunk of dead coral with a smattering of sea grape and battered screw palm that grew on nothing but pockets of brackish rainwater and sand. It was the point where the dog shoal broke the surface, a well-known navigational hazard that even the fishing boats kept well away from. In daylight, Andros Island showed to eastwards, but at night, it was as safe as houses. The Disco came up fast, and then slowly lowered herself back into the water and slid up within a cable's length of the rock. Her arrival brought small waves that lapped and sucked at the rock and then were still. The anchor slipped silently down 40 feet and held. Down in the hold, Largo and the disposal team of 4 waited for the underwater hatch to be opened. The 5 men wore aqualungs. Largo held nothing but a powerful underwater electric torch. The 4 others were divided into 2 pairs. They wore webbing slung between them, and they sat on the edge of the iron grating with their frogman's feet dangling, waiting for the water to swirl in and give them buoyancy. On the webbing between each pair rested a 6-foot-long tapering object in an obscene grey rubber envelope. The water seeped, rushed, and then burst into the hold, submerging the 5 men. They slipped off their seats and trudged out through the hatchway, Largo in the lead, and the 2 pairs behind him at precisely tested intervals. Largo did not at first switch on his torch. It was not necessary, and it would bring stupid, dazed fish that were a distraction. It might even bring shark or barracuda, and though they would be no more than a nuisance, one of the team, despite Largo's assurances, might lose his nerve. They swam on in the soft moonlit mist of the sea. At first there was nothing but a milky void below them, but then the coral shelf of the island showed up, climbing steeply towards the surface. Sea fans, like small shrouds in the moonlight, waved softly, beckoning, and the clumps and trees of coral were grey and enigmatic. It was because of these things, the harmless underwater mysteries that make the skin crawl on the inexperienced, that Largo had decided to lead the disposal teams himself. Out in the open, where the plane had foundered, the eye of the big searchlight made, with the known object of the plane itself, the underwater world, into the semblance of a big room. But this was different. This grey-white world needed the contempt of a swimmer who had experienced these phantom dangers 1,000 times before. That was the main reason why Largo led the teams. He also wanted to know exactly how the 2 grey sausages were stored away. It could happen, if things went wrong, that he would have to salvage them himself. The underpart of the small island had been eroded by the waves, so that, seen from below, it resembled a thick mushroom. Under the umbrella of coral there was a wide fissure, a dark wound in the side of the stem. Largo made for it, and when he was close, switched on his torch. Beneath the umbrella of coral it was dark. The yellow light of the torch showed up the minute life of an inshore coral community, the pale sea urchins and the fierce black spines of sea eggs, the shifting underbrush of seaweeds, the yellow and blue-seeking antennae of a langoust, the butterfly and angelfish, fluttering like moths in the light, a coiled bêche de mer, a couple of meandering sea caterpillars, and the black and green jelly of a sea hare. Largo lowered the black fins on his feet, got his balance on a ledge, and looked round, shining his torch on the rock so that the 2 teams could get a foothold. Then he waved them on and into the smooth, broad fissure that showed a glimmer of moonlight at its far end inside the centre of the rock. The underwater cave was only about 10 yards long. Largo led the teams one after the other through and into the small chamber that might once perhaps have been a wonderful repository for a different kind of treasure. From the chamber, a narrow fissure led to the upper air, and this would certainly become a fine blowhole in a storm, though it would be unlikely that fishermen would be close enough to the dog shoal in a storm to see the water fountaining out of the centre of the island. Above the present waterline in the chamber, Largo's men had hammered stanchions into the rock to form cradles for the 2 atomic weapons, with leather straps to hold them secure against any weather. Now, one by one, the 2 teams lifted the rubber packages up on the iron bars and made them secure. Largo examined the result and was satisfied. The weapons would be ready for him when he needed them. In the meantime, such radiation as there was would be quarantined within this tiny rock, 100 miles from Nassau, and his men and his ship would be clean and innocent as snow. The 5 men trudged calmly back to the ship and into the hold through the hatch. To the boom of the engines, the bows of the Disco lifted slowly out of the water, and the beautiful ship, streamlined like the gondola of some machine of the air rather than of the sea, skimmed off on the homeward journey. Largo stripped off his equipment and, with a towel round his slim waist, went forward to the radio cabin. He had missed the midnight call. It was now 1:15, 7:15 in the morning for Blofeld. Largo thought of this while contact was being made. Blofeld would be sitting there, haggard perhaps, probably unshaven. There would be coffee beside him, the last of an endless chain of cups. Largo could smell it. Now Blofeld would be able to take a taxi to the Turkish baths in the Rue Aubert, his resort when there were tensions to be dissipated. And there, at least, he would sleep. Number 1 speaking. Number 2 listening. Phase 3 completed. Phase 3 completed. Successful. 1 a.m. here. Closing down. I am satisfied. Largo stripped off the earphones. He thought to himself, so am I. We are more than 3/4 home. Now, only the devil can stop us. He went into the stateroom and carefully made himself a tall glass of his favourite drink, creme de menthe frappe with a maraschino cherry on top. He sipped it delicately to the end and ate the cherry. Then he took one more cherry out of the bottle, slipped it into his mouth, and went up on the bridge.